Welcome back to the podcast. I am so sorry if my voice sounds like I'm dying. I do die for like 2 weeks straight. I think I caught basically 2 viruses at the same time. And I don't know if all of you are catching these, but they're the type of virus that just like drains your soul a little bit. So I'm sorry about my voice. But I am Sarah Levenger. I teach people about psychology, how to infuse it into your brand so you can cut costs and boost sales, captivate the masses, do all the things you want to do with your brand. Today, we are going to talk about a topic that is extremely near and dear to my heart, and that's about generational psychology. I don't see a whole lot of stuff about generations within the marketing sphere, especially in the D2C sphere, which is interesting to me because I get a ton of questions from people about should I hire a UGC creator that looks close to the age of the person I'm trying to bring in the door? Do I need to make sure that like our ads are specifically speaking to a specific audience? How do how do we sell to somebody that's in a different generation than we're currently pulling in? I get a lot of these type of generational based questions, which is the reason why I want to focus on this specific topic today. So to start, clearly, every generation that we currently have, especially in the US market, has had a very different experience of the world. And I think it's important to start from experience because what you experience as a human drastically changes how you go about life, how you respond to things, how much you consume, where you consume it, who you consume it from, and who you consume it with, right? So it's pretty important, I think, for everybody to just start with the general knowledge of everyone on the planet is building their habits based on what they experience in life. Now, to just go down into like a tiny little bit of like how humans work. Most science today is studying kind of like where we build our foundational ideas from, um, like how we actually build our worldview. And what they're finding currently is that years 1 through 7 is really, really important for humans and how they actually come up with what they think about the world. Now, excuse me, a lot of this comes from whoever your primary caretaker is. So your parents will actually form a whole lot about what you believe as a person, clearly, because you're with them a lot, but also because they're very influential. Obviously, kids are very susceptible, I would say, to influence, mostly because they're like fresh out of the box humans, like they've never experienced life before. So they have to take their cues from anybody who's taking care of them, right, on a very consistent basis. Years 1 through 7, very, very important. As you get older, though, you start to develop your own ideas about what the world is, how you get resources, what success looks like, who your partner should be in life, who your friend should be, those type of things. So your teen years are really for challenging some of those ideas that you developed in years 1 through 7. And you start to kind of come into your own. You don't necessarily cast off a whole lot of these ideas yet, but you start kind of thinking about them a whole lot more. Is this the type of person I want to be? Identities kind of get shaped in the teen years. And then as soon as you get up into your 20s, for like general purposes, for girls, we start to kind of like solidify our neural connections around the age of 20-ish, somewhere in there, 20 to 25. It's a little bit later for guys, which again, that's just biologically how we're created. As soon as your brain, though, starts to kind of make these very solid connections in there, then that's kind of who you're going to be, right, for the next however long until you start coming up against new experiences in your life that will challenge your ideas. So just like basis of how we come up with our worldview. Now, starting from the top, every generation, right, that comes from the generation before it will have a different idea of how the world works based upon what their parents told them in these kind of formative years. For boomers, they were raised by the silent generation. And the silent generation was this they went through a very intense period where they experienced a full-on depression. And they went through all these really intense experiences just from an economic standpoint, from a socioeconomic standpoint. And they really did experience a lot of emotional turmoil because it wasn't quite a safe time for them, right? As adults. So as the silent generation started to have kids, they started to kind of pass on this message to their children of the world is not safe, right? Safety is like going to be your primary thing that you're going to always struggle with. And the silent generation also just parentally was kind of very harsh on their children. Very much like children should be seen but not heard type of thing, right? Just go in your corner and do stuff. Just don't talk to me. So because of this, because of how the silent generation was processing their emotions around these really intense periods of history, the boomers heard this message that was the world is not safe. And I don't know what to do with feelings. So just turn them off, right? So the silent generation, very much emotionally stunted, like very, very like closed off. Boomers then took this message of like the world is not safe and kind of became kind of emotionally distant from their children, which was Gen X. So the boomers started having kids. They had heard this message of like the world isn't safe. So they started to tell Gen X kids, hey, the world isn't safe, but like I'm going to do my best to try and figure this out on my own. I'm still processing my own emotions. So I'm going to distance from you emotionally, but like you need to just go figure it out, right? So the boomers were the first to kind of teach their kids to be very emotionally independent. So silent generation, very emotionally stunted. Boomer generation, emotionally distant. Gen X is emotionally independent. They were taught the world is not safe, but you can figure it out on your own. We're going to give you like the tools to just like go figure out how to be a person on your own. Gen X was really interesting though, because they took this message of like, you're going to have to do this by yourself and decided that they didn't want the same for their kids. And this was really interesting because it was the first shift that we saw emotionally in the generations where the Gen Xers taught their children, their millennials, that I was not validated as a child and I had like a really intense experience around this emotional distance with my parent. So I don't want you to experience that. I'm emotionally independent. Um, but I don't want you to be emotionally independent. So Gen X actually started to validate heavily. They validated the millennials' feelings more than any other generation that had preceded them. So the millennials heard this message, the world isn't safe, but you are safe with your feelings. Feelings are safe. Come tell me, let me validate how you feel. So silent generation, emotionally stunted, boomers, emotionally distant, Gen Xers, emotionally independent. Millennials were the very first to be emotionally validated. So now the millennials go out into the world and they start kind of like messing with stuff. They start messing stuff up. You know what I'm saying? They go out and they start changing stuff about how the systems in the world work based upon how they feel, not necessarily how they logically think about things, because their parents told them everything you feel is okay. You're a valid, worthwhile human, even if you don't feel it, right? So millennials actually did a great job of understanding that emotion actually comes before a lot of the behaviors that we do as humans. The interesting part though is the millennials never turned it off. Like, and this is something I work with my kids a lot on, which is feelings are chemicals, right? They're just chemicals in the body that come up depending on external stimuli and internal belief systems based upon those first 1 to 7 years. Just, I'm so sorry to my children. If you're listening to this later in your life, I'm sorry. You had way too much psychological knowledge before you even got to your formative years. Anyway, so because you feel external stimuli and then internal belief systems and they collide, right? And a feeling comes up, which is just a chemical in the brain. Oftentimes, feelings are real. It doesn't always mean they're valid, right? So this was something that the millennials kind of had to learn a little bit. Feelings are real, but it doesn't mean they're always valid, even though they got a ton of validation from the Gen X parent. So because of this, we saw a lot of really interesting cultural changes happen, a lot around like identities, right? That's what we're currently dealing with in the society and in the culture is everybody's trying to figure out what identity means to like internally. So millennials went out, started teaching their Gen Z kids that you can create any type of emotional world that you want, right? So millennials were so emotionally validated all the time that we finally got to Gen Zers, and Gen Zers want impact, right? So they're emotionally very self-aware children, and they want that self-expression. They're really into connection and belonging and inclusivity. But the Gen Zers are really, they're turning out to be very interesting because the more that we study them, the more that we're starting to see this generation is the first generation to understand that I want to feel a specific way every single day. And I'm not going to compromise just so that other people will feel good. No offense to the Gen Zers. They're fantastic. They're a really interesting generation. But so as you can see, each generation has its own worldview based upon what they were experiencing during that time. Because, the silent generation was going through a depression. The boomers went through a Vietnam War. Like the millennials went through a giant, just amazing amount of tech revolution. And the Gen Zers are being raised on AI. So like everybody's got some weird stuff that we've been through that has created these really interesting emotional needs. But just to roll back through them again, right? So the boomers, because they are extremely emotionally distant, they really crave this like respect, relevancy, security, recognition, right? So when I say, here's the one thing that you should never ever say to a boomer, do not ever tell them what to do. And that's the whole point of this episode. Boomers in particular are the type of people that they want somebody to give them the information, and then they want to feel like they are in control of themselves and they can go ahead and make their own decisions. So please never ever say to a boomer like you don't know what you're doing. Don't ever tell a boomer this is, the product for you. You need to give them the information and help them make their own decisions, right? So respect, relevancy, security, recognition. Here's what you should never say to a Gen Xer. Don't ever tell a Gen Xer that they don't know what they're doing. I'm an 88 baby. So like I sit right in between the Gen X and the millennials. And so I feel more Gen X. Like I feel like my behavior is a little bit more Gen X than it is millennials. And I don't like to be told what to do. Don't tell a Gen Xer what to do. Gen Xers crave a lot of autonomy, individualism, self-sufficiency, quality of life. They're very, very conscious about being in control of their own life because they had this, interesting experience. Millennials. So millennials never, ever, ever tell a millennial that they're not valued and they're not worth it. It's so important for your messaging and your marketing, for your brands everywhere, to make sure that you validate their experience first. So never come to a millennial and say what you think doesn't matter, right? Or like your experience isn't what it is. Validate that emotion. We understand that you're hurting. We understand that this is hard or that you've struggled or that it's, painful. Validate first for these millennials. They're seeking that inclusivity. They really want that community and those rich experiences. So, and then again, for the last one, Gen Zers, please don't tell a Gen Zer what to do. They're also kind of in the same like subgroup as boomers, and they're still kind of developing. So we don't know a whole lot about what the Gen Zers are going to need as they grow up and become like regular consumers. But for Gen Zers, you really gotta understand that they've grown up with tech. They have literally like bottle fed themselves on AI. So one of the things that we need to express to Gen Zers is that you're different. You are unique, right? If you're going to sell to the younger generations, talk about that connection, that belonging, understanding that social impact and identity is incredibly important to this particular audience. So, producer Scotty had a question. I love all these questions that producer Scotty puts because then I can actually like see what other people might be questioning about. Okay. So Gen Z or values? That's a good question. So producer Scotty asked, what about like Gen Z values? What do they value like experience wise? Gen Zers are interesting. And again, we just don't have like enough people writing a whole lot of like research about Gen Zers quite yet. I haven't seen too many books on Gen Z. So this is just based upon like a ton of like studies that I'm reading and articles and things. Gen Zers, I think, really value the experience of what's the word? Like self-reflection. They're one of those weird crowds of generations that they just want connectivity. And this is the reason why I need to go write this down, producer Scotty. I need to go do an episode on participation marketing. We've talked about it like a tiny bit in the past, but I need to do a whole episode on this because I think Gen Zers are going to be the generation that craves participation over everything else. So that I think that generation, man, they just want to be a part of the brand, not just engage with a brand. They want to be a part of the brand. So I hope this gives you kind of a good range of like what all the generations are thinking and what they're craving, how they actually created some of these worldviews. Because depending on which generation you're selling to, you really do need to be quite careful about what you do and don't say to them at specific periods of their customer journey. If you want to learn more, though, please go over to Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram now, finally. I'm trying to get up on TikTok, YouTube. Sarah's just tired all the time. We're just running in place. So yes, please go follow me at Sarah Levinger. That's SarahLevinger. at Sarah Levenger, basically everywhere. Or go to sarahlevenger.co. I have a ton of articles if you guys really want to just like read some of my past newsletters. Those are all up on my website. And then yes, sign up for the newsletter because I have a ton of cool stuff coming this year. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
The Brain Driven Brands podcast is part of the Learn and Laugh series on the Quickfire Podcast Network.